There is a version of you that only exists in silence. You have never met her. You have never met him. You have never met them, because every time they begin to surface, a phone buzzes, a notification blinks, a voice calls from another room, and the fragile, forming shape dissolves back into the noise before it can take a breath. Picture a diver standing at the edge of black water at midnight. The surface is glass, undisturbed, and somewhere beneath it lies something the diver has never seen. Something that has been waiting in the dark for years, patient, unbothered by time. Every single day, that diver walks to the edge. Every single day they look down. And every single day, someone calls them back to shore before they can jump. A meeting. A text, an obligation that feels, in the moment, like the most urgent thing in the world. And so the diver turns around, walks back up the beach, and tells themselves, tomorrow I will go under. Tomorrow I will find out what is down there. That tomorrow has been arriving for years, and somehow it never arrives at all. This is not a metaphor about vacation. This is not a metaphor about needing rest. This is a metaphor about disappearance, the kind that has nothing to do with geography and everything to do with the architecture of a mind that has never once been allowed to sit alone with itself, undisturbed, unwatched, unperformed. You have built an entire identity out of being reachable. You have built an entire sense of self out of being seen, being liked, being available, being useful, and being understood by people who, if we are honest, do not actually understand you at all. Because you have never given them the version of you that exists beneath the noise. You have given them the version that answers quickly, the version that smiles at the right moment, the version that absorbs the emotional weather of every room it enters and adjusts itself accordingly, like water taking the shape of whatever container it is poured into. And the tragedy is not that this version of you is fake. The tragedy is that it is real, and it is exhausting, and it is slowly replacing the one part of you that was never meant to be shared with anyone. You need to disappear for a while. Not from your responsibilities, not from the people who love you. You need to disappear from the performance. And to understand why this single act, quiet and unglamorous as it sounds, might be the most disciplined, most radical, most stoic thing you ever do, we have to go back roughly 2,000 years to a man who understood exile better than almost anyone in recorded history. Because it was forced upon him, and because of that force, he became something greater than he ever could have become in comfort. His name was Seneca, and before the world remembers him as a philosopher, it should remember him as a man who was stripped of everything familiar, exiled to Corsica by an emperor who wanted him gone, cut off from Rome, from his career, from his social standing, from the entire architecture of identity he had spent decades constructing. Seneca did not have the luxury of choosing his disappearance. It was handed to him, cruelly, without warning, the way life often hands us the very lessons we have been avoiding. And what did he do there, alone, stripped of an audience, stripped of the applause that had once validated his existence? He wrote. He thought. He confronted, in the silence of that exile, the parts of himself that Rome's noise had allowed him to ignore for years. He came back a different man. Not because Corsica was magical, not because isolation is inherently transformative. He came back different, because for the first time in his adult life, there was no one left to perform for. And in that absence of an audience, something older and quieter in him finally had room to speak. This is the tested weapon the ancients left us, buried under centuries of self-help paraphrasing and diluted quotations printed on coffee mugs. Disappearance is not retreat. Disappearance is reclamation. The Stoics did not teach withdrawal from life. They taught withdrawal from the noise that convinces you life is happening somewhere else, in someone else's validation, in someone else's approval, in the endless mirror of other people's eyes. Marcus Aurelius, an emperor with the entire world watching his every decision, wrote to himself, in private, in a language only he would read, reminding himself constantly that he did not need to look outward for his sense of worth, that the retreat into one's own soul was more powerful than any retreat into the countryside. He called it the citadel within, not a citadel of stone. A citadel of unshaken selfhood, built not through comfort, but through the deliberate, repeated act of stepping back from the crowd and asking, in silence, who am I when no one is watching? Let that question sit for a moment, because most people spend their entire lives avoiding it. Here is the parable, and it is older than most people realize. There is a story told about a young sculptor in ancient Greece who was praised endlessly by everyone in his village. Every statue he carved was met with applause. Every figure he shaped drew crowds who marveled at his skill, and for years he carved exactly what the crowd wanted. Familiar poses, familiar gods, familiar faces that mirrored what had already succeeded before, because success, once tasted, is terrifying to risk losing. One day, an older craftsman, a man who had long since stopped seeking the approval of the village, watched the young sculptor work, and he asked him a simple question. He asked, "When was the last time you carved something you had never seen before?" The young sculptor could not answer. He realized, standing there with his chisel in his hand, that every piece of stone he had touched in years had been shaped not by his own vision, but by the anticipated applause of people who did not understand marble, who did not understand form, who only understood what was familiar enough to clap for. He had become extraordinarily skilled at giving people what they already wanted. And in doing so, he had lost the one thing that made him a true creator instead of a craftsman for hire: his imagination, his unrepeatable vision. It had atrophied from disuse, the way a muscle disappears when it is never asked to work. The old craftsman told him to disappear, not forever, just long enough to forget the sound of applause, long enough for the echo of the crowd to fade from his ears, so that a different voice, quieter, older, more his own, could finally be heard underneath it. This is the hidden psychological truth beneath the parable, and it applies whether you have ever touched a chisel in your life or not. Every single one of us is, in some sense, carving to the sound of applause. We have internalized so deeply, we no longer notice it is there. The parent we are still trying to prove ourselves to, the classroom we were once ranked in, the follower count, the like button, the sideways glance of a colleague, the imagined judgment of strangers who will forget us within seconds of scrolling past. Carl Jung spent a lifetime studying what happens to a person who spends decades performing an identity built entirely around what he called the persona, the mask we present to the world, the version of ourselves calibrated for approval. Jung's warning, and it is not a gentle one, was that if you wear the mask long enough, you begin to forget it is a mask at all. You begin to believe you are the performance. And the parts of you that do not fit the performance, the anger you were never allowed to express, the ambition you were told was too much, the grief you buried because it made others uncomfortable, and the desires that did not match what was expected of you, all of it does not vanish. It goes underground. Jung called this the shadow, and he was unambiguous about what happens when the shadow is ignored for too long. It does not weaken from neglect. It grows in the dark, unsupervised, and eventually it finds its way to the surface anyway, usually in the ugliest possible form, as bitterness, as sudden rage, or as a breakdown that seems to come from nowhere but was actually decades in the making. You are not broken because you feel a pull toward disappearance. You are not broken because some quiet, insistent part of you keeps whispering that you need distance from everyone and everything that has ever asked you to be smaller than you are. That whisper is not weakness. That whisper is the sound of your own shadow finally demanding an audience after years of being denied one. And here is where we must stop being gentle with you, because gentleness alone will not get you to the water's edge. You have excuses, and they are good ones. They sound responsible. They sound loving. They sound like maturity. I cannot disappear, you tell yourself, because people depend on me. I cannot take the silence, you tell yourself, because there is too much to do. I cannot sit alone with my own mind, you tell yourself, because the moment I stop moving, I am afraid of what I will find. Let us be honest about that last one, because it is the truest of them all, hiding underneath the others like a foundation nobody wants to inspect. You are afraid of the silence not because it is empty, but because you suspect it is not empty at all. You suspect that if you stopped, even for a single day, the noise you have built your entire adult life around would fall away, and underneath it would be a version of you that has opinions you have not voiced, grief you have not processed, dreams you quietly murdered years ago because they were inconvenient to the people around you, and an anger, perhaps, at how much of your life has been spent shaping yourself into whatever shape kept the peace. That is not a monster waiting for you in the dark. That is simply you, the parts of you that were never given permission to exist out loud. But you have been running from that meeting for so long that you have mistaken the fear of it for evidence that it should be avoided altogether. This is where Nietzsche walks in, uninvited, unwilling to let you off easily, because Nietzsche never once let anyone off easily. He wrote about something he called self-overcoming, and it is frequently misunderstood as some grand, violent conquest of the self, some dramatic battle scene where you defeat your weaknesses like an enemy army. It is not that. Self-overcoming, in its truest sense, is the willingness to look directly at the parts of yourself that the crowd has shaped, to see clearly what you have become in service of being liked, being safe, and being acceptable, and to have the courage to burn some of that away, not out of self-hatred, but out of a fierce, uncompromising love for who you actually are underneath it. Nietzsche believed that most people never become themselves. They become an accumulation of other people's expectations, stacked so high and so early in life that by the time they are adults, they mistake the stack for their own personality. He believed the rare few who broke from this pattern did so through solitude. Deliberate, chosen, uncomfortable solitude, the kind that strips away the noise until only the essential remains. This is why disappearance matters. Not because the world is too much, though it often is. Not because people are exhausting, though they often are. Disappearance matters because it is the only reliable mechanism by which a person can hear themselves clearly enough to know the difference between who they actually are and who they have been trained, since birth, to pretend to be. I want you to notice something happening right now, in this very moment, as you listen to this. Your attention has likely drifted at least once already. Some part of your mind has already reached for your phone, or wondered what else is happening elsewhere, or started composing a reply to something entirely unrelated to what you are hearing. This is not a criticism. It is proof. It is living, breathing proof of exactly what we have been discussing, because if you cannot sit still for a few uninterrupted minutes of thought without your attention fracturing into 6 directions, imagine what it would take to sit still for an entire day, a week, a season, long enough for the noise in your mind to finally settle like sediment in still water. If a few minutes of quiet reflection already feel like a mild discomfort you want to escape, that discomfort is the exact evidence that you have been avoiding for years the thing you most need. Stay with me. Do not reach for the phone yet. Let this next part land the way it is meant to. Because here is what disappearance actually looks like. Stripped of the romance and the aesthetic of the wandering monk or the mountain hermit that social media has turned into a costume rather than a practice. It rarely means leaving your job, your family, or your city. For most people, that kind of disappearance is neither possible nor wise, and chasing it becomes its own form of escapism. Another mask worn to avoid the real work. Disappearance, in the way that actually changes a person, is smaller and far more demanding than a plane ticket to somewhere remote. It is the discipline of removing yourself, regularly and without apology, from the systems designed to keep you performing. It is turning off the noise long enough that you have to sit with your own unedited thoughts instead of someone else's opinions about how you should think. It is the willingness to disappoint people, occasionally, deliberately, because you have chosen your own reconstruction over their comfort. It is choosing, for a defined stretch of time, to stop explaining yourself to anyone, including the version of yourself that has spent years explaining, justifying, softening, and shrinking to keep the peace. Marcus Aurelius, ruling an empire, surrounded at all hours by advisors and generals and the endless demands of governance, still found his way to this kind of disappearance every single day. Not through geography, but through discipline. He withdrew into his own mind deliberately, repeatedly, treating solitude not as an escape from duty, but as the very foundation that made his duty bearable. He understood something most people spend their entire lives refusing to accept, which is that you cannot pour clarity, patience, or wisdom into the world from a well that has never been allowed to refill in silence. Every person who has ever burned out, every person who has ever snapped at someone they love over something trivial, every person who has ever felt an inexplicable hollowness despite having, by every external measure, a good life, is a person whose well has been drawn from constantly and refilled rarely, if ever. You are allowed to stop giving before you have anything left to give. Let me tell you what happens, specifically and without exaggeration, when a person finally allows themselves this disappearance, even briefly. At first, there is discomfort, and it is often mistaken for boredom, though it is not boredom at all. It is withdrawal. The mind that has been fed a constant stream of stimulation, validation, and distraction goes through something not unlike detoxification when that stream is cut off. Thoughts that have been suppressed for months or years begin to surface, uninvited, and they are rarely pleasant at first. Old griefs, unresolved anger, memories you had successfully avoided by staying busy enough to never think about them. This is the part most people flee from, reaching immediately for their phone, for a distraction, for anything that will drown out the discomfort of finally being alone with an unfiltered mind. But if you can sit through that discomfort, if you can let it wash over you without reaching for the escape hatch, something remarkable begins to happen on the other side of it. The noise begins to quiet down. Not because the problems have vanished, but because for the first time in a long while, you are hearing your own thoughts instead of the borrowed anxieties, borrowed opinions, and borrowed urgency of everyone else's noise. You begin to notice which of your beliefs are actually yours, and which were simply absorbed, unquestioned, from parents, from culture, or from 1,000 small moments of conditioning you never consented to. You begin to notice how much of your daily anxiety was never actually yours to carry in the first place, how much of it belonged to other people's expectations that you had quietly adopted as your own, without ever examining whether they deserved a place in your mind at all. This is the Citadel Marcus Aurelius wrote about. It is not a place you visit once and then possess forever. It is a practice, returned to again and again, the way a blacksmith returns to the forge, not because the fire fixes the metal permanently in one visit, but because strength requires repetition, requires heat applied again and again until the shape holds even under pressure. And here is where the shadow work becomes unavoidable, because you cannot disappear from the noise without eventually confronting what the noise has been helping you avoid. Jung believed that the parts of ourselves we refuse to look at do not simply sit quietly waiting to be acknowledged. They project themselves outward. The anger you refuse to feel becomes irritability you cannot explain, snapping at people who did nothing to deserve it. The grief you refuse to process becomes a low, persistent numbness that makes even good things in your life feel distant and unreal. The ambition you buried to keep others comfortable becomes resentment, quiet, and corrosive toward people who are simply living the life you once wanted for yourself before you talked yourself out of it. None of this is weakness. It is simply what happens to any part of a person that is denied expression for long enough. It does not disappear. It waits, and it grows, and eventually it demands to be seen, one way or another, on its own terms, if you refuse to meet it on yours. Disappearance, real disappearance, is the deliberate choice to meet these parts of yourself on your own terms, in a room with no audience, before life forces the meeting to happen in a moment of crisis instead. This is not comfortable work. Do not let anyone tell you that solitude is peaceful in the way a spa day is peaceful. True solitude, the kind that actually changes a person, often feels like grief at first, because in a sense, it is grief. It is grieving the version of yourself you built to survive other people's expectations. It is grieving the years spent performing instead of living. It is grieving the fact that you cannot get those years back, only the years that remain. But on the other side of that grief is something the Stoics called apatheia, often mistranslated as apathy, as though they were advocating for numbness, when in truth they meant something closer to freedom from being controlled by every fleeting emotional current that passes through you. It is not the absence of feeling, it is the presence of a self so grounded, so rooted in its own understanding, that it can feel the full weight of an emotion without being swept away by it. This groundedness is not available to a person who has never spent real time alone with themselves. It cannot be borrowed from a book. It cannot be inherited from someone else's advice. It has to be built, in silence, through the deliberate and repeated act of disappearing from the noise long enough to hear your own foundation being laid. Consider, for a moment, how differently you would move through your days if you were not constantly calibrating your behavior to the imagined judgment of others. Consider how much lighter your decisions would feel if half of the mental weight you currently carry, the weight of what will they think, what if they are disappointed, and what if I am too much or not enough, were simply lifted, not because you stopped caring about people, but because you finally understood that their opinion of you was never yours to carry in the first place. This is not coldness. This is not becoming someone who no longer cares about others. It is, paradoxically, the only way to become someone capable of loving others without needing them to constantly validate your worth in return. A person who has done this work, who has disappeared long enough to meet their own shadow and make peace with it, loves differently than a person still performing for approval. They love without the quiet, exhausting subtext of "please still like me." They can disagree without collapsing. They can be disliked without shattering. They can sit with someone else's pain without needing to fix it immediately, just to relieve their own discomfort. This is not detachment. This is the deepest form of presence there is, because it is presence uncontaminated by fear. Think now of the sculptor again, standing in front of his stone after his return from disappearance. He does not carve differently because disappearance gave him new hands. He carves differently because disappearance gave him back his own eyes, the ones that had been replaced, slowly and invisibly, by the eyes of the crowd. When he lifts the chisel now, he is not asking what they will clap for. He is asking what is actually inside this stone, waiting to be released. This is the shift disappearance makes possible in a life, any life, regardless of whether that life involves marble or spreadsheets, or classrooms or kitchens or boardrooms. The question changes from what will be approved of to what is actually true, and once that question changes, nothing you create, nothing you say, nothing you build in your life again will carry quite the same hollow echo it once did. You do not need a mountain. You do not need a monastery. You do not need to abandon the people who depend on you or the responsibilities that structure your days. What you need is smaller and, in some ways, harder, because it demands discipline rather than escape. You need to build, deliberately and without apology, pockets of true absence from the performance. Time in which no one can reach you. Time in which you do not explain yourself to anyone. Time in which the only audience for your thoughts is you, and you alone, sitting with whatever surfaces, however uncomfortable, until it is finished speaking. This might look like hours instead of months. It might look like a single evening each week where the phone goes dark and the mind is left to wander without a leash. It might look like a walk taken with no destination and no headphones, just the sound of your own footsteps and the thoughts that rise unbidden when there is nothing left to distract you from them. The scale matters less than the sincerity. What matters is that you stop treating disappearance as a luxury reserved for people with more time or fewer obligations, and start treating it as the non-negotiable maintenance required to remain a coherent, grounded person in a world engineered to fracture your attention into 1,000 shallow directions. Seneca did not choose Corsica. Marcus Aurelius did not choose the burden of an empire that forced him to seek his citadel within rather than in the countryside. Neither of them had the option of a comfortable, curated retreat. They built their disappearance out of necessity, in the middle of chaos, because they understood something you must come to understand as well. The noise will never stop on its own. No one is coming to grant you permission to step back. No calendar will magically clear itself to make room for the silence you need. You have to take it. Deliberately. Repeatedly. Without waiting for the perfect moment. Because the perfect moment is a myth designed by the same part of you that has been avoiding this work for years. And when you do take it, when you finally sit still long enough to hear the parts of yourself that the noise has been drowning out, do not expect comfort immediately. Expect, instead, honesty, which is rarely comfortable at first but is the only foundation strong enough to build an unshaken life upon. You will meet grief you postponed. You will meet anger you were taught was unacceptable. You will meet desires you buried because they inconvenienced other people. Meet them anyway. Do not flinch. Do not reach for the phone the moment the discomfort rises. Sit with it the way Seneca sat with exile, the way Marcus Aurelius sat with the crushing weight of an empire, and the way the sculptor sat with silence until his own vision, long buried under the noise of applause, finally found its way back to the surface. This is not weakness. This is not indulgence. This is the most disciplined act available to a person living in a world designed to keep them distracted from themselves. Disappearance, chosen deliberately and returned to again and again, is how a person stops being a reaction to everyone else's expectations and becomes, instead, someone rooted. Someone unshaken. Someone whose calm in the middle of chaos is not performance but genuine foundation. The world will always be loud. It will always demand your attention, your availability, your constant performance of competence and warmth and reliability. None of that will change. What can change is whether you keep giving all of yourself to that noise, or whether you begin, quietly and without asking permission, to reclaim pieces of yourself from it, one deliberate disappearance at a time. If any part of what you have just heard settles into you the way a stone settles at the bottom of still water, slow, quiet, but permanent, then let that settling be the only signal you need. Not a signal to comment, not a signal to chase a number on a screen, but a signal to actually do the thing, to close this, to sit in silence for longer than feels comfortable, and to meet whatever rises without flinching. If this channel has been useful in helping you find that quiet, unshaken version of yourself, the truest support you can offer is not a reflex click, but a return. A willingness to come back, when you need another reminder that the citadel within you is real, and that it has been waiting patiently for you to finally walk through the door. Disappear for a while, not from your life, from the performance of it. What waits on the other side has been waiting a very long time, and it is not going anywhere. But neither should you keep pretending it isn't there. Why you must vanish before you can truly live silence is the weapon nobody taught you to use. Disappearing is how strong minds rebuild themselves. Solitude will reveal who you actually are. Vanishing quietly is the ultimate act of power.